Forget everything you've seen in those glossy travel brochures and sugar-coated shows like Emily in Paris, because the France they're selling you for top dollar is dead and rotting, a festering corpse they simply forgot to bury. If you think you're flying out here to sip champagne overlooking the Eiffel Tower to the sound of accordions, brace yourself for a brutal crash landing into reality. Instead of fresh croissants and Chanel No. 5, your nostrils will be assaulted by the eye-watering stench of stale urine, rotting garbage, and cheap crack being smoked right on the steps of historic monuments. Today's France isn't the cradle of the Enlightenment or the fashion capital of the world. It's a colossal disaster movie set where civilization has lost the war to barbarism, and the concept of safety is as outdated as horse-drawn carriages or powdered wigs.
Stepping onto this soil, you aren't walking into a romantic fairy tale. You're entering a war zone where every square foot of cobblestone is soaked, not in love stories, but in pure hatred, aggression, and a social tension ready to detonate like a nuclear bomb at any second. Picture an aging, demented aristocrat who stopped bathing, threw million-dollar diamonds over her filthy underwear, and now sits in a puddle of her own filth while trying to lecture the rest of the world on manners and tolerance. That's the modern Fifth Republic for you. This is a country that just committed the most spectacular, massive cultural suicide of the 21st century, throwing open its gates, its borders, and its wallets to those who despise its values, hate its history, and actively dream of seeing it in ruins. Think I'm exaggerating? I'm actually sugarcoating it, because the human brain simply refuses to process that the great Paris, the city of light, the home of Hugo and Balzac, has devolved into a massive ghetto, a patchwork of ethnic enclaves where even the cops are terrified to enter in armored vehicles. Secular state laws mean absolutely nothing there. They've been replaced by the law of the jungle, the rule of the mob, and Sharia law. And this isn't happening in some distant, forgotten banlieue. It's happening right here, in the very heart of Europe, a 5-minute walk from the Louvre and the Champs-Élysées. Walking these streets, you don't feel like a welcomed guest. You feel like prey. You can literally feel thousands of predatory eyes sizing up the price of your watch, your phone, and your life. That sticky, primal animal fear won't let you go for a single second until you're safely back on a plane home. Assuming, of course, you don't get robbed blind on the way to Charles de Gaulle Airport, which happens with terrifying regularity. France is a country of paradoxes. A massive scam where overflowing flophouses hide behind the facades of luxury palaces, and the crunch under tourists' feet is the shattered glass of looted storefronts and torched cars. Setting cars on fire has practically become a national sport here, a legitimate way to express a civic stance. If you aren't prepared to watch the tourism capital of the world morph into a third-world dump, do yourself a favor. Cancel your tickets, close your eyes, and stay in your bubble of illusions. Because the real France will chew up your rose-colored glasses, spit the frames right back in your face, and force-feed you a truth so vile, it'll make you want to scrub yourself with bleach. We're about to take a journey into the dark underbelly of this country, looking into the corners where no tour guides will ever take you. We'll witness the massive migrant tent cities in downtown Paris, descend into a subway system that feels more like the circles of hell, choke on the stench of rotting waste during yet another garbage strike, and finally understand how a nation that gave the world human rights became a hostage to its own weakness, blind tolerance, and pathetic submission. If you've been brainwashed by cheesy romance novels and heavily filtered Instagram posts into thinking the air in France smells like fresh-baked baguettes, herbe de Provence, and high-end perfume, get ready for the most brutal olfactory letdown of your life. Because the real, unfiltered scent of this country is a pungent, tear-inducing cocktail of stale urine, rotting seafood, and sun-baked garbage that sits uncollected for weeks, turning entire cities into giant petri dishes, breeding bacteria unknown to science. Welcome to a reality where eau de toilette isn't a fancy fragrance, but a literal description of the streets. Today, Paris, Marseille, and Lyon aren't competing over architectural beauty. They're in a cutthroat race to see who can drown in their own waste the fastest. And trust me,
The competition is fierce.
You step out of your $500 a night hotel room, expecting to sip morning coffee on a terrace, only to have your nose assaulted by a stench that makes you wish you packed a gas mask. Every corner, alleyway, subway entrance, and even the walls of historic cathedrals are used by locals and the massive homeless population as a free 24/7 public restroom. When the sun bakes this centuries-old layer of urea, it creates an ammonia fog so thick you'll swear you aren't in the fashion capital of the world, but on an abandoned farm with a busted septic tank. But that's just the opening act. The real symphony of French filth is the garbage, which has practically become part of their cultural DNA, a twisted symbol of freedom and democracy. Over here, the right to not clean up after yourself and the right to go on strike, leaving the city to rot, are valued way higher than basic hygiene or common sense. Picture mountains of black trash bags piling up on the sidewalks higher than a person, blocking walkways and spilling out into traffic. Inside those bags, there is a thriving, boiling ecosystem. Leftover foie gras and oysters are rotting alongside decomposing vegetables, while a foul, sticky sludge oozes from the bottom of the pile. A toxic ooze you will inevitably track back into your hotel on the soles of your expensive sneakers, and no doormat in the world can save you. A garbage collectors' strike in France isn't a state of emergency. It's a national holiday of civil disobedience that happens with terrifying regularity. During these periods, cities turn into post-apocalyptic wastelands where rats the size of fat cats throw banquets right in front of you without an ounce of fear, while tourists, holding perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces, desperately try to frame their selfies to crop out the massive heap of trash blocking the Arc de Triomphe. Down in Marseille, things are even worse. There, filth isn't a temporary issue. It's a state of mind. People just chuck their trash straight out the windows like we're back in the Middle Ages, and the wind whips shredded newspapers, plastic cups, and bags down the streets, creating literal tumbleweeds of garbage that snag on pedestrians' legs. Think the parks and gardens are a safe haven? Guess again. Those famous Parisian lawns, where characters in rom-coms love to picnic, are actually landmines of cigarette butts, shattered glass, and both dog and human feces. Sitting down there in a pair of white pants is a move reserved for someone who has completely lost touch with reality, or their eyesight. The Seine itself, that legendary river praised by poets, is nothing but a murky, toxic sludge. You'd be terrified to dip a finger in it, let alone swim, even though politicians promise to clean it up every single year, and even pull publicity stunts by drinking from it, after which they presumably undergo a heavy course of antibiotics. That water holds the entire periodic table of elements and a complete biological archive of major urban diseases. French grime isn't just uncollected trash. It's a symbol of degradation, a massive spit in the face of aesthetics, and glaring proof that a once great civilization is simply exhausted. It has given up on bathing, stopped taking care of itself, and devolved to the level of a sleazy gas station bathroom. As you navigate these sticky, filthy streets, stepping over puddles of unknown origin, a dark realization hits you. Legendary French perfumes weren't invented to enhance beauty. They were created for the sole purpose of masking the unbearable, inescapable stench of unwashed bodies and rotting cities that has become the true calling card of modern-day France. If your brain has been poisoned by romantic comedies like Amélie, and you naively believe the Paris metro is all about charming Art Nouveau architecture, accordion music, and polite locals reading Proust on their commute, get ready for the most brutal, claustrophobic, and deeply traumatic wake-up call of your life. Descending into the bowels of the French underground is a voluntary ticket to a local branch of hell on earth. Stepping into the festering guts of a massive, diseased organism that digests millions of human bodies every day, sucking every last drop of joy, energy, and hope right out of them. Forget about air conditioning, basic cleanliness, or personal space. The Parisian transit system is nothing but an ancient, screeching ventilation shaft clogged with grime, rats, and human sweat. The very first thing that hits you at the entrance is the smell. That signature, indescribable bouquet of burning rubber, cheap fast food, severe body odor, and stale urine that is soaked so deeply into every concrete corner, escalator, and transfer tunnel
that no amount of industrial bleach could ever scrub it out. You shell out good money for a ticket, only to watch thousands of people around you vaulting over turnstiles, tailgating through the gates, and blatantly spitting on the rules. Paying fare here is strictly for tourists and suckers. The real masters of this underground domain are aggressive packs of teens and the absolute dregs of society, who look at you like you're an absolute idiot for subsidizing their chaos. Try taking line 13 during rush hour, and you'll discover a whole new level of forced physical intimacy with strangers. You'll be pinned against the train glass, feeling a stranger's hot breath on your neck and random sweaty hands brushing your face. Trapped in this suffocating, sticky mob with temperatures pushing past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, your only prayer is to not pass out, because if you hit the floor, you will absolutely be trampled. But the crush of the crowd is only half the nightmare. The real issue is security, or rather, the complete and utter lack of it. The Paris metro is a prime hunting ground for thousands of pickpockets and highly organized crime rings. They work in coordinated packs, swarming their target, creating artificial bottlenecks, and picking your pockets clean with the sleight of hand of a Vegas magician, while you, the naive tourist, are busy squinting at a confusing transit map. A voice over the intercom constantly and monotonously repeats, "Beware of pickpockets," like some useless magic spell. It doesn't save anyone. It's just the soundtrack to your mounting anxiety, playing in the background while your iPhone, wallet, and passport get swiped directly under the security cameras that seem to be installed purely for decoration. Now, let's transfer to the RER, the commuter rail system connecting the city center to the suburbs, where the tension skyrockets exponentially. The RER is a literal artery pumping the dark, hostile energy of the notorious banlieues straight into the heart of Paris. The train cars often look like they've survived a bombing raid. Slashed seats, graffiti-covered windows, shattered glass, garbage covering the floors, and a crowd that stares at you with the heavy, calculating gaze of a predator locking onto its next meal. You take the train from Charles de Gaulle Airport, fully expecting to be greeted by beauty. But instead, outside the window, you're met with depressive concrete housing projects, barbed wire, and mountains of trash lining the tracks. The contrast between your Parisian dream and this grim reality smacks you in the face like a filthy wet rag, inducing a massive hit of cognitive dissonance. Navigate transfer hubs like Châtelet-Les Halles, a massive underground labyrinth where you can wander for hours and lose your mind, and you'll encounter the absolute bottom of the social barrel. You've got homeless people sleeping in filthy blankets, junkies openly smoking crack right on the platform, without a single care for cops or passing kids, and lunatics screaming curses into the void. Pushing your way through this human freak show, you feel less like a tourist and more like a character in a survival horror game, where the only objective is to make it back to the surface alive with your belongings. The Paris metro isn't public transit. It's an endurance test. It's a social meat grinder where the rich, the poor, the tourists, and the thieves are all mashed together. Thousands of little tragedies play out down here every single day, and nobody gives a damn. In this subterranean world, there is only one rule: the law of the jungle. Survival belongs to the fast, the ruthless, and the ones with nerves of steel. If you aren't ready for that kind of brawl, you're better off walking. Though, be warned, the streets above are holding their own brutal surprises, waiting just for you. If you still buy into the fairy tales of great French tolerance, the melting pot of nations, and successful integration, it's time to rip off those rose-colored glasses and take a detour from the Champs-Élysées. Take a walk under the overpasses of the Ring Road or around the Canal Saint-Martin, where your faith in European values will be smashed to pieces against a brutal, filthy, and terrifying reality. What France is experiencing today isn't just a migrant crisis. It's a full-blown demographic and cultural tsunami washing away the old way of life, turning entire Parisian neighborhoods into branch offices of Kabul, Mogadishu, and Eritrea. What you're about to see aren't temporary growing pains. This is the new normal, the visual collapse of the multiculturalism experiment. Endless tent cities stretching for miles, popping up directly on sidewalks, in parks, and under highway overpasses. Tens of thousands of people live here who have absolutely nothing in common with French culture, don't speak a word of the language, and, frankly, have zero interest in learning it.
They brought their own way of life with them and established it right here, through the sheer rule of the strong. Picture this. You're walking along the embankment where characters from classic Remarque novels used to stroll, but now you're forced to step over sleeping bodies, mountains of rags, and open fires roasting food right in the middle of a modern metropolis. The air is thick with the smoke of burning plastic, the stench of unwashed bodies, and an undercurrent of aggression you can feel crawling on your skin. These aren't the poor, desperate families fleeing war zones that the mainstream media keep spoon-feeding you. The overwhelming majority are young, able-bodied, military-aged men, fueled by testosterone, roaming the streets with nothing to do. They pack together like wolves, glaring at locals and tourists not as the hosts of this country, but as an annoying obstacle or their next easy payday. Enter the Porte de la Chapelle area, or the perimeter of the Gare du Nord, and you are no longer in France. You've crossed into a gray zone, an extraterritorial enclave where the cops only show up for massive raids that look more like military operations. And frankly, those raids are entirely pointless. Riot police tear down the tents, bulldozers scoop up the trash, but 2 days later, like some twisted myth of Sisyphus, the camp respawns in the exact same spot, bigger, angrier, and more sprawling than before. The locals, the actual Parisians whose ancestors built this city, are living in a permanent state of fear and siege. They are terrified to let their kids play outside. They bolt iron bars across their windows, and they strictly avoid making eye contact with the new owners of the streets, knowing any wrong look can be taken as a challenge and end with a knife in the gut. It's a creeping occupation, happening quietly, without a single shot fired or bomb dropped. One morning you step out for a croissant and realize you don't hear a word of French being spoken. Storefront signs have flipped to Arabic script. Women have vanished from the streets or wrapped themselves in hijabs. And you have become an alien in your own city, a foreigner in the country where you were born. The government, completely paralyzed by political correctness and the mortal fear of being labeled racist, has simply thrown in the towel. It has abandoned its own citizens to fend for themselves, allowing public parks and squares to be hijacked into chaotic flop houses and open-air toilets, breeding a monstrous social tension that hangs in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. You see well-meaning volunteers handing out soup and clothes, but it's a drop in the ocean. It's like trying to cure a compound fracture with a Band-Aid, because the flood of people isn't slowing down. It's accelerating. Every new arrival demands their slice of the European pie, a pie that is shrinking and growing staler by the day. France tried to play the fairy godmother to the entire globe, but all she did was invite guests into her home, who immediately kicked her out onto the doormat, claimed her bedroom, ate her food, and are now dictating what she should wear and which gods she must pray to. It is the tragedy of a great nation that completely lost its instinct for self-preservation. When you stare at those endless rows of tents under the bridges, you aren't just looking at a housing crisis. You are looking at the graveyard of the European dream, a towering monument to human stupidity and naivety. And the bill for that naivety is going to be impossibly steep, paid not by the politicians hiding away in their heavily guarded mansions, but by ordinary people forced to live next door to this chaos, risking their health and their lives every single day. If you think all of France is just Notre Dame postcards and the lavender fields of Provence, you are in for a brutal reality check the second you hit the so-called banlieue, or suburbs. These aren't just poor neighborhoods. They are exclusion zones, literal states within a state where French law doesn't exist, where the police are treated like an invading enemy army, and where real power belongs to local drug lords and imams, who enforce their own order with the ruthlessness of medieval warlords. Welcome to the concrete jungles of Saint-Denis, Clichy-sous-Bois, or the northern quarters of Marseille, places officially labeled sensitive urban zones by the government, but known on the streets by a much simpler and more honest name: no-go zones. These are territories where setting foot as a white person, let alone a tourist carrying a camera, is strictly forbidden under the threat of death or severe mutilation. And that's not hyperbole. It's a survival manual written in the blood of those who dared to test those boundaries. Picture endless rows of depressing gray high-rises that look like maximum security prison blocks,
complete with shattered windows, boarded-up entrances, and walls coated in layers of graffiti that isn't meant to be art, but gang territorial markers. Inside these brutalist labyrinths, originally designed in the 1960s as social housing for workers, a third generation of people has now grown up having never worked a single day in their lives. They fiercely hate France, blaming the country for all their misery, and live entirely off welfare checks and illicit crime money. The atmosphere here is one of a city under siege. Lookouts with walkie-talkies sit on the rooftops, instantly broadcasting the arrival of any police cruiser.
Within a minute, that patrol car is met with a hail of rocks, Molotov cocktails, and even automatic gunfire. Because there are more weapons in these neighborhoods than in some military barracks. Scoring an AK-47 out here is faster and easier than grabbing a fresh baguette in central Paris. Cops, firefighters, and paramedics routinely refuse to enter these areas without SWAT escorts because their vehicles are regularly lured into traps and torched while the crews get brutally mobbed. Realizing its own total impotence, the government has basically signed an unspoken non-aggression pact. You don't bring your mess downtown and we don't mess with you, allowing these festering abscesses to grow and metastasize right under the capital's nose. A completely separate subculture has spawned in these zones, speaking its own language. A hybrid of French, Arabic, and Verlan street slang, incomprehensible to the average French citizen, and governed by rigid street codes of honor where a sideways glance can get your throat slit, and snitching to the cops guarantees a public execution to make an example out of you. Women here are absolute ghosts. They either stay locked indoors or walk around with their eyes glued to the pavement, draped in black from head to toe, because any hint of standard European clothing or makeup is labeled as prostitution and punished with public shaming or horrific violence. It's funny how the very same human rights activists who love to scream from the rooftops about women's rights in Iran conveniently turn a blind eye to what's happening a 20-minute drive from the Champs-Élysées, where Sharia law has de facto replaced the civil code. Local public schools are active war zones, where teachers are terrified of their own students, where lessons revolve around conspiracy theories and hatred for infidels rather than Voltaire, and where any attempt to enforce basic discipline ends in riots or death threats. This is a parallel universe operating on its own timeline, a world that violently despises everything French, yet continues to parasite off the Republic's body, bleeding it dry through welfare programs. This world has zero intention of integrating. It plans to swallow, digest, and destroy everything around it, expanding its borders year after year, swallowing up new streets and blocks, and turning once peaceful suburbs into active battlefields. So, the next time you drive past those grim, towering silhouettes on the horizon, remember that behind those concrete walls boils the rage of millions of people who have absolutely nothing to lose but their chains and their hatred. Sooner or later, that fury is going to spill over and flood the cozy boulevards of Paris in fire and blood, just like it did during the 2005 riots. But next time, the scale of the catastrophe will be so massive that no one will be spared. And only then will France finally realize it has nurtured a monster in its own womb. But by then, it will be far too late to change a damn thing. You naively believe you've arrived in the capital of high culture, where the most heinous crime imaginable is serving warm champagne or overcooking a steak. But the brutal truth is that the second your foot touches the Parisian cobblestones, you cease to be a human being, an individual, or a guest. You instantly devolve into a walking wallet, a fat, clueless antelope that willingly wandered into a savanna crawling with starving, ruthless predators. And open season here runs year-round, 24/7, with no weekends or holidays. Today's Paris is the undisputed global capital of street crime, a place where the art of separating people from their cash has been honed to absolute perfection. You will be robbed with such sheer audacity and virtuosity that you won't even realize the exact moment your dream romantic getaway morphed into a police theft report, which, by the way, absolutely no one is going to investigate. Picture the Trocadero Plaza, the ultimate spot for an Eiffel Tower photo op. You're smiling, you're happy, you raise your arm for a selfie, and in that exact split second, a swarm of young girls with clipboards descends on you, supposedly collecting signatures for deaf mutes or starving children in Africa.
They box you in, screaming and waving papers directly in your face to create artificial chaos. They grab you, they hug you, and while you're standing there stunned, desperately trying to swat them away, their accomplices have already lifted your phone, your wallet, your passport, and even slipped the watch right off your wrist. A minute later, the swarm vanishes just as quickly as it appeared, leaving you standing in the middle of the plaza, financially naked. And not a single bystander will lift a finger to help, because everyone is used to it. It's as much a part of the local scenery as the Iron Lady herself.
But that's the soft option for the lucky ones, because Paris is also booming with violent, strong-arm robberies and literal gangland smash and grabs straight out of the Brazilian favelas. If you're wearing a luxury watch, say a Rolex, a Patek Philippe, or a Richard Mille, just know you are already being tracked. You are being tailed the second you step out of a high-end restaurant or hotel by dedicated scouts who feed your location to hitters on scooters. The moment you hop in a cab or idle at a red light, they will smash your window with a hammer, grab your arm, and rip the watch off along with your skin. Try to fight back, and you'll catch a knife blade or brass knuckles to the face. And this isn't happening in some sketchy, unlit alley. This goes down on the Champs-Élysées, on Avenue Montaigne, right in the most prestigious zip codes where a single square meter of real estate costs tens of thousands of euros. The police are completely castrated, paralyzed by laws that go out of their way to protect the criminals far more than the victims. The vast majority of these muggers are undocumented, underage migrants who legally cannot be thrown in prison. Cops arrest them, give them a slap on the wrist, and release them 2 hours later so they can head straight back to work, laughing in the face of a justice system where they enjoy total, absolute impunity. And what about the infamous scam artists at the Sacré-Cœur? You know, those hulking guys who forcibly grab your arm, tie a woven bracelet around your finger, and immediately demand 20 euros for it. If you refuse to pay up, you're instantly surrounded by a mob of their friends with highly malicious intentions, and you cough up the cash just to walk away in one piece.
It's a straight-up racket, literal broad daylight extortion, and the police just stroll right past because intervening means dealing with a massive headache and getting slapped with accusations of racism. To these gangs, tourists are nothing but a food source, a disposable resource to be milked dry and tossed in the trash. You think your suitcase is safe in the lobby of a luxury hotel? Wrong. It'll be rolled right out from under your nose while you're busy checking in at the front desk. Think you can relax inside the Louvre? Think again. Entire dynasties of pickpockets operate in those halls, passing down their trade from generation to generation. And they know the security camera blind spots far better than the museum's chief of security. The atmosphere in this city is drenched in pure paranoia. Locals walk around, clutching their bags to their chests. In the metro, backpacks are worn on the front like baby carriers. And nobody dares leave a phone on a cafe table because a kid running by will snatch it in a heartbeat. It's a life lived in condition red, a constant state of combat readiness that murders any shred of enjoyment from your trip. You aren't admiring the architecture. You're scanning the crowd for threats, flinching at every sudden movement, feeling exactly like a cornered animal. And when you finally drag yourself into a police precinct to file a report, you'll find a line of weeping Chinese, American, and Russian tourists just like you, entirely stripped of everything they own, including their hope for justice. An exhausted officer won't even look you in the eye as he hands you a slip of paper for your insurance company and mutters, "Monsieur, this is Paris. You should have been paying attention."
That single phrase encapsulates the government's entire stance on your safety. If you're drowning, save yourself. And if you got robbed, it's your own damn fault for bringing cash and valuables here in the first place. Today's France is a territory where property rights have been completely voided by the right of brute force. If you aren't mentally prepared to be stripped clean at a moment's notice, do yourself a favor. Stay home and look at postcards of the Eiffel Tower. It's infinitely cheaper and far safer for both your sanity and your physical health. If you grew up on those sweet, lying Disney fairy tales and that movie Ratatouille, which brainwashed the world into thinking a rat is just a cute, fluffy little chef dying to cook you a gourmet meal, brace yourself for the most stomach-churning shock of your life. Because the real Remy, living in the Parisian sewers, has absolutely zero interest in whipping up some French onion soup for you. He wants to gnaw your finger to the bone while you doze off on a bench in the Tuileries Garden and infect you with leptospirosis, guaranteeing a long, agonizing death. Today's Paris isn't a city of humans. It's the rodent capital of the world, a massive, overpopulated rat colony where there are 2 to 3 fat, brazen vermin for every single human resident. That statistic, 6 million long-tailed occupiers, makes them an absolute demographic majority, a democratic majority that practically runs this town. Picture this. You're taking a lovely evening stroll near the Louvre, admiring the illuminated pyramid, and you sit down on the lawn for a glass of wine. Suddenly, you notice the grass around you shifting, the bushes rustling, and a split second later, the horrifying realization hits you. You aren't alone. You are completely surrounded by an army of gray soldiers out on a night hunt. They aren't scared of people. They lost their genetic fear of humans centuries ago, and they stare at you with those beady red eyes, not like a predator, but like you're just an annoying hurdle standing between them and the half-eaten sandwich you just dropped. Parisian rats, or surmulots as the city desperately tries to rebrand them, are literal mutants fattened up on high-calorie haute cuisine garbage. They grow to the size of small cats. They can jump 3 feet in the air, and their teeth are capable of chewing straight through concrete, lead, and aluminum. So don't for a second think you're completely safe in your ground floor hotel room. The problem has reached such apocalyptic proportions that city officials, throwing their hands up in total surrender, have started pushing an absolutely insane policy of peaceful coexistence. They are seriously asking Parisians to learn to live side by side with the rats, to respect their rights, and to embrace them as part of the city's biodiversity. It sounds like the ravings of a madman, but this is the actual official agenda down at City Hall. Just let that sink in. The great civilization that built Versailles and launched the supersonic Concorde has fully capitulated to rodents, waving the white flag and handing over the keys to the city. Now, when you walk into a bakery and see a rat scurrying across a display of croissants, the cashier will just shrug. C'est la vie, right? Can't just throw away the merchandise. Rats have hijacked the parks, the banks of the Seine, restaurant basements, and even government buildings. They strut around like they own the place, throwing massive orgies right under tourists' feet at the base of the Saint-Jacques Tower. And the squeaking and the clicking of their claws on the asphalt has become the new soundtrack of Parisian nightlife, drowning out the music spilling from the bars. This is a biological catastrophe, an invasion of biblical proportions. And the most terrifying part is that these creatures are smart. They learn, they bypass traps, and they've mutated an immunity to most poisons, meaning every new attempt to exterminate them only makes them stronger, tougher, and significantly meaner. Imagine sitting on an open-air restaurant terrace, candles flickering, wine pouring. You're about to confess your love, and suddenly, a fat, soaking wet rat that just crawled out of a sewage pipe where it was swimming in human feces scrambles right up your expensive slacks. In that single split second, all the romance instantly dies, replaced only by primal terror and a violent gag reflex. Doctors are sounding the alarm because these rats aren't just an eyesore. They are living biological time bombs, carrying the plague, typhus, rabies, and dozens of other diseases. With the rat population doubling the human one, a massive epidemic isn't a possibility. It's just a matter of time. Yet the city keeps churning out tons of trash, continuously feeding the beast. It genuinely feels like there is a second subterranean city running right beneath the Parisian asphalt. A dark mirror of the world above, complete with its own kings, wars, and territories. And that underground empire is slowly but surely swallowing the surface. You think Notre Dame burned down because of a random electrical short? Who knows? Maybe the rats chewed through the wiring looking for warmth, because absolutely nothing is sacred to them. To these vermin, all of human history is nothing but a backdrop for their endless feeding frenzy. France lost this war. It surrendered its streets to the enemy, so when you visit Paris, remember, you are just a guest here, and they are the landlords. They are watching you from every crack and storm drain, just waiting for you to make a mistake, leave your food unguarded, or simply fall asleep and let your guard down. This isn't the city of light, it's the city of shadows. And in those shadows, millions of whiskers are twitching and millions of starving eyes are gleaming. knowing that sooner or later this city will belong to them completely once the very last human packs up and flees, unable to endure this nightmare.
If you think the absolute worst thing that can happen to you in Paris is a crappy cup of coffee or a swiped wallet, you are dead wrong, because this city is fully capable of breaking not just your budget, but your actual psyche, pushing you into a mental breakdown that has a legitimate, official medical diagnosis found in psychiatric textbooks: Paris syndrome. This isn't a joke, an urban legend, or some campfire story to scare tourists. It is a real, documented clinical condition that hospitalizes dozens, if not hundreds of people every single year. It mostly affects Japanese and Chinese tourists, whose fragile mental state simply shatters upon a head-on collision between their heavily idealized fantasies and the gritty, filthy, overtly aggressive reality of the French capital. Just picture someone who has spent their entire life saving up for this ultimate dream vacation. They've memorized the layout of the Louvre, binged Audrey Tautou movies, and pictured Paris as the city of angels, where everyone is impossibly polite, elegantly dressed, and smells like fresh violets. Then this person steps off the plane, practically glowing with hope, and instantly takes a massive punch to the gut. Instead of gallant gentlemen, they are greeted by foul-mouthed cabbies running a meter scam. Instead of pristine streets, they find mountains of garbage and rats. And instead of high fashion, they are swarmed by pickpockets and aggressive panhandlers, literally spitting at their feet. The tourist's brain simply refuses to process this incoming data. It literally short-circuits, creating a cognitive dissonance so violent that people start experiencing hallucinations, severe paranoia, panic attacks, vomiting, tachycardia, and a crushing sense of absolute hopelessness. People freeze up in catatonic stupors right in the middle of the street. They sob uncontrollably in their hotel rooms, totally paralyzed by the fear of walking outside. They desperately call their embassies, begging for an emergency evacuation, like they're trapped in a natural disaster zone, because their world has just collapsed. Their dream turned out to be a vicious, ugly caricature, and they feel deeply betrayed and gaslit by history itself. The Japanese embassy actually had to set up a dedicated 24/7 hotline for victims, where trained psychologists try to calmly explain to these devastated tourists that France is not an anime. It is a harsh, deeply cynical country where politeness is viewed as a fatal weakness, and being an absolute jerk is a national sport. You walk into a luxury boutique ready to drop thousands of dollars, but the sales associates look at you like you're the dirt on their shoes. They completely ignore you, gossiping about their personal drama on their phones, while you stand there awkwardly holding a hanger. And this sheer arrogance, this overwhelming superiority complex that literally oozes from every French pore, delivers the final death blow to your self-esteem. The cafe waiters are an entirely separate caste of sadists who genuinely get off on humiliating their paying customers. They'll bring you a menu in a half hour, the check in an hour, and if you dare ask for a glass of water or make a complaint, you will be hit with a wave of such icy, devastating contempt that you'll wish the earth would just swallow you whole. Paris syndrome is the disease of supreme disappointment. It is the brutal tax you pay for the sky-high expectations shoved down our throats by pop culture, aggressive marketing, and the lies of glossy magazines. You were expecting a fairy tale, but you walked straight into a gritty social drama with serious horror elements, and your psyche simply can't handle the contrast, snapping like a dry twig. Doctors have documented cases where tourists actually start gaslighting themselves, believing it's their own fault they hate Paris, that they just aren't cultured or intelligent enough to appreciate the city, and this profound guilt literally drives them to suicidal thoughts. It is a brutally harsh lesson. Never confuse tourism with immigration, and never confuse the movies with real life, because Paris on screen and Paris in reality are two completely different planets. And if you aren't mentally prepared to be yelled at, shoved, scammed, and openly despised for spending your own hard-earned money, you are much better off staying home and rewatching Amélie. It's infinitely safer for your sanity. France is a country that fundamentally does not like its guests. It only tolerates them for their cash. Deep down, it resents anyone who doesn't speak the language flawlessly, who doesn't grasp every single microscopic nuance of their etiquette, or who is simply different.
And this snobbery, this blatant xenophobia, expertly disguised as cultural exceptionalism, is a toxic poison that infects the city's atmosphere, making it entirely unbreathable for any sensitive soul. Paris syndrome is the ultimate proof that architectural beauty can never compensate for the profound ugliness of human relations. Even the most gorgeous city on earth can become a living hell if it's populated by people who hate everyone around them, including themselves. And that hatred, that bitter bile lingering in the air, is the real souvenir you'll be taking home instead of a cheap fridge magnet. If you think the ultimate French tradition revolves around sipping wine, eating cheese, and debating philosophy, you are living in a stereotype that's been dead for at least 50 years. Because the one true, burning passion of the modern French citizen, the thing they wake up for and will sacrifice absolutely everything to do, is to march out into the street, build a barricade out of trash cans, torch somebody's car, and smash the windows of a high-end boutique just to feel like a revolutionary hero. When in reality, they're nothing but a glorified vandal and a thug. France is a nation in a state of permanent riot. A place where going on strike isn't an absolute last resort when negotiations fail, but the knee-jerk default reaction to literally any problem or any government proposal, no matter how entirely reasonable it might be. Try raising the retirement age by a couple of months, or try bumping the price of gas by a few pennies, and you will instantly get streets engulfed in flames, blockaded highways, clouds of tear gas, and thousands of people in yellow vests tearing everything in their path to shreds with the absolute ferocity of savages. It is the national sport, deeply embedded in their cultural DNA and absorbed with their mother's milk. If you're pissed off about something, go break something, flex your muscles, terrify the establishment, and force them to back down. Paris during these protests is a literal war zone where riot police, strapped in heavy armor like medieval knights, clash with a mob armed with cobblestones, Molotov cocktails, and iron rebar. This utter chaos gets broadcast on every news channel around the globe as a shining example of democracy in action, when in reality, it's a glaring display of a dangerously weak government completely incapable of controlling its own citizens. Did you come here on vacation? Congratulations, but your train is canceled because the engineers are striking. Your flight is grounded because air traffic controllers demand a raise. Your museum is shut down because the guards are unhappy with their working conditions. And even the garbage collectors, as we've already mentioned, will just drop everything for weeks and turn the city into a sprawling landfill. Nobody will be held accountable for any of this because the right to strike here is sacred. It completely trumps your right to travel, your right to a clean city, and basic common sense. Now, let's talk about New Year's Eve in France. It's not a celebration with fireworks and champagne. It's a night of fire, where thousands upon thousands of cars are torched all across the country. Just for the hell of it. Just for tradition. And the very next day, the Minister of the Interior stands at a podium and proudly reports, "We only had 800 cars burned this year. What a tremendous success. The trend is positive." And everyone just nods along, patting themselves on the back for a job well done. Just let that sheer absurdity sink in. The malicious destruction of private property has become the norm, a mere statistical rounding error, background noise that nobody even pays attention to anymore, except for the poor bastards whose cars got roasted, though they're probably insured and just write it off philosophically. It is a culture of destruction, a culture of sheer denial, where any semblance of order is instantly viewed as oppression, and pure chaos is celebrated as freedom. The youth from the suburbs, those notorious banlieues we talked about, will seize any excuse, whether it's a soccer match or a police incident, to incite a full-scale riot, loot electronics and clothing stores, and burn down schools or libraries. They do this with a profound sense of absolute impunity and even pride, filming their criminal exploits on their phones and plastering them all over social media. This is a generation that has absolutely no desire to build. They only want to break things, violently snatching whatever they feel they were unfairly denied. And the government, instead of crushing this barbarism with an iron fist, tries to negotiate, throwing welfare checks and integration programs at them. Programs that completely fail because you cannot integrate chaos, and you cannot negotiate with a wildfire.
You either extinguish it, or you let it burn everything to the ground.
Today's France is a massive powder keg with a lit fuse, and nobody knows when the big one is finally going to blow. But every single person can smell the smoke in the air. You can feel this electrified atmosphere, this looming premonition of a civil war where it's every man for himself, where the only law is a police baton or a rioter's brick. The average citizen who just wants to live in peace, do their job, and raise their kids is left feeling like a hostage in an absurd theater directed by history itself. A history that has decided to brutally mock the nation that once gave the world the Enlightenment, as it now descends into the pitch black of a new dark age. And those legendary chants of liberty, equality, fraternity just sound like a sick, twisted joke echoing over the burning barricades. We have reached the end of our grim journey. And now that we've ripped off all the masks and scrubbed the heavy makeup off the face of this aging courtesan, we are left staring at a naked, terrifying, and irreversible truth. The France you fell in love with through Alexandre Dumas novels, New Wave cinema, and Joe Dassin records simply does not exist anymore. It is dead. And right now, you and I aren't on some walking tour. We are attending the long, lavish, and incredibly expensive funeral of a once great civilization. Everything you see around you is just a phantom limb, the mere inertia of history. A giant wax museum where the sets are still majestic, the palaces still drip with gold, and the cathedrals still pierce the sky. But the very soul that once gave these stones their meaning has long abandoned the corpse, leaving it to be picked clean by vultures, looters, and a new breed of barbarians who didn't come here to build, but to consume the rotting leftovers of its former glory. France has committed arguably the most poetic and utterly tragic suicide in human history. It wasn't conquered by an invading army. It wasn't wiped out by a plague or a meteor strike. It simply threw open its gates, willingly placing its own neck under the guillotine of tolerance. It surrendered its identity, its pride, and its absolute right to be the master of its own house, in exchange for phantom ideals that ultimately weaponized themselves against her. This is a requiem for a nation that gave the world the Enlightenment, human rights, haute cuisine, and the very concept of style, but which today is utterly terrified to call things by their real names, paralyzed by the fear of defending its own citizens, and pathetically apologizing for its own great history to the very people who actively despise it. You walk through Paris and you only see ghosts. Over in that cafe where Hemingway and Picasso used to drink, dealers are now slinging crack. Down this cobblestone street, where revolutionaries once marched, dreaming of freedom, mobs now march, demanding total submission to Sharia law. And in that grand theater where the world's greatest operas were once sung, the only soundtrack left is the wail of police sirens and the blast of firecrackers. This is the Titanic, and it has already smashed head-on into the iceberg of reality. The cargo holds are filling with freezing water. The rats are already fleeing the lower decks, but up on the promenade, the orchestra is still playing upbeat tunes, and passengers in tuxedos are sipping champagne, violently pretending that the ship's steep tilt is just a bold new fashion trend, a temporary inconvenience that will surely buff out. But it won't buff out. The point of no return is deep in the rearview mirror. France has become a hostage to its own fatal kindness and weakness, devolving into the sick man of Europe, lying in a permanent coma, hooked up to life support via EU bailouts and the endless conveyor belt of tourist cash. But the brain is already dead, and the heart only beats out of sheer inertia. Is it profoundly sad? Absolutely. But it is a massive, brutal lesson for all of us. Civilizations are mortal. They are fragile. And if you don't fiercely defend them, if you don't bare your teeth and throw punches, they vanish, dissolving into chaos and leaving behind nothing but pretty ruins and faded memories. You and I are literally witnessing the decline of Europe, that exact Spenglerian sunset that has dragged on for decades, but whose finale is now glaringly obvious and entirely inevitable. If you want to catch one final fleeting glimpse of that old world, come now, but leave your rose-colored glasses at home. Stare truth right in the face and burn this exact moment into your memory. Because your kids are going to see a completely different country here, populated by a different people, bowing to a different faith, and speaking an entirely different language. That was France. Remember her exactly like this. And now, if you, like us, aren't afraid to stare directly into the abyss, if you're sick to your stomach of sugar-coated lies and demand to see the world exactly as it is, raw, brutal, but deeply authentic, then you know exactly what to do. Smash that subscribe button right now, because this is the only place on the internet that feeds you the raw, unvarnished truth that makes everyone else grind their teeth. Hit the like button on this video if you value brutal honesty over comfortable illusions, and sound off in the comments. Are you still willing to visit this version of France? Or would you rather just love her from a safe distance? We will keep lancing the infected boils of this planet. We'll keep exposing the rotting underbelly of paradise. And our next trip is going to be even harsher, even more explicit, and infinitely more dangerous. So, stick around, join our club of absolute realists, and we'll see you out there on the ruins of the old world.